Certainly, it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I prepared a few remarks on German editions of Hannah Arendt's work. Most of you know Hannah Arendt wrote a whole book focused on the proposal to think what we are doing, or in her own German translation, dem nachzudenken, was wir eigentlich tun, wenn wir tätig sind, meaning in English to reflect on what we really do when we are active. But she did not leave many reflections on what she did when she wrote and published her works. Her general attitude in this matter is best demonstrated by two quotations. One is from the minutes of the 1972 Toronto conference published by Melvin Hill, in which she said, now I quote, "I don't reflect much on what I'm doing. I think it's a waste of time." The other is from the famous 1964 Gauss interview. There, Gauss asked her to comment on her writing habits and experience. "And when you are finished," was one of his questions, to which Arendt replied, "Then I'm finished." These quotations indicate a reflected nonchalance about which I cannot comment here. Maybe we may comment later on. By citing them, I only want to indicate that there is little hope of getting assistance from Arendt when looking for clues concerning her bibliography. In other words, in posthumous editorial matters, one is left to one's own devices. One way of coping with this situation is to ask whether one can detect some kind of hidden order to her work. It is with this question in mind that I started my work on Hannah Arendt. The first step was to compile a complete bibliography of her English and German publications, which became the basis of my editorial endeavors. Later, these were published in a volume of autobiographical text entitled Ich will verstehen. That's this little book. Some of you may know it. I pass it around. The bibliography starts here at the end. Now I may outline briefly some basics of Hannah Arendt's bibliography as I understand them. The work Hannah Arendt left to posterity is bilingual. She started writing in German, her mother tongue. But after she achieved command of her English language, she published her major works in both languages. In an overview, one may distinguish three categories of monographs. During her lifetime, Arendt published first monographs written originally in German, for example, Der Liebesbegriff by Augustin, her doctoral dissertation, published in 1929, and then her book on Rachel Varnhagen, completed in Paris in 1939 and first published in an English translation by Clara and Richard Winston in 1958. The second category is monographs written in English and translated by Arendt herself into German. This holds for the origins of totalitarianism, which became Elemente und Ursprünge totaler Herrschaft, further for the human condition, that is in German Vita Activa oder vom tätigen Leben, and then on revolution, which became Über die Revolution. I should note at this point that in the cases of both the origins and the human condition, Arendt liked the German titles better than the English ones. Explicitly, she indicated that they are more appropriate to what she wanted to say. The third category is still within the monograph, written in English and translated under Arendt's supervision, and that would hold for Eichmann in Jerusalem. She didn't translate that herself, she had a translator in German and she worked with them. Beginning with the origins of totalitarianism, all of Arendt's monographs were published first in English. She considered the corresponding German versions to be second editions. Producing further English editions, she at times, but not as a rule, improved and revised the original in accordance with the German. The changes she made when translating the English into the German were not just marginal, as you might already have guessed when I referred to the English and German quotations from the Human Condition at the beginning of my remarks. At certain points, Arendt used the German version to clarify and explain her thought, a fact that is no secret anymore. Actually, it has been studied by Arendt scholars. One of them is Roy Zhao, the name one, do you know his name? In addition to the 6 monographs I mentioned, Arendt published 3 book-length volumes of collected essays, which in her lifetime were available only in English. Between Past and Future, first with 6 and with 8 essays, then Men in Dark Times, containing 11 essays, and Crisis of the Republic with 4 essays. And there are 5 collections of essays that appeared in German during her lifetime. You want me to say the title? 6 essays. Then the next one is Fragwürdige Traditionsbestände im politischen Denken der Gegenwart. Then we have Macht und Gewalt, enlarged in its 2nd edition by an interview Arendt gave to Adalbert Reif. Then there is the 2 essays Walter Benjamin and Bertolt Brecht, and 2 essays on Wahrheit und Lüge in der Politik. Most essays thus collected emerged from lectures Arendt had given in the US and in Germany. Since she lectured in both languages on the same topics, each essay has a different history. In Germany, some lectures were recorded by radio stations, and a selection of this material was produced by a special publishing house called Hörbuch Verlag. After Arendt's death, now I come to the posthumous work, the pattern changed for obvious reasons. All translations were done by scholars who certainly did not write what Arendt had not rewrite what Arendt had put down, even though they have made their own mistakes. Only a few years after Arendt's death, her main German publisher, Piper Verlag, published a translation of The Life of the Mind, edited by Mary McCarthy, and it became Vom Leben disguised as. Piper Verlag also published Arendt's lectures on Kant's political philosophy, and that in German became Das Urteilen, Texte zu Kants politischer Philosophie. In the 1980s, Claude Piper and Renate Dörner, then the editor in charge of what they call Arendt-Pflege in Germany, so it's something like Arendt Matters, at Piper Verlag, approached me to design some guidelines for their future Arendt publishing policy. We agreed on the following key features. All books by Arendt, so what I call monographs, and should published during her lifetime, will be kept in print. Which unfortunately is no longer the case. I mean, Piper has not stayed with this policy. The second was the major essays Arendt published either in German or in English or in both languages will be collected in several volumes. Following the hints that could be taken from collections Arendt published during her lifetime, we decided to organize these essays by subject and not chronologically. And the third maxim, so to speak, was unpublished manuscript will get separate editions. As for the essays, a 3-volume collection was planned. The first volume conceived along the lines of Men in Dark Times, the second assembling exercises in political thought by following the lead of Between Past and Future, and the third intended to be a selection from Arendt's published writings about Jewish questions. Volumes 1 and 2 have been published, volume 3 is still pending. The essays collected in the above-named 5 German publications during Arendt's lifetime will be included in this 3-volume posthumous edition. In designing volumes 1 and 2 of these collected essays, I used Arendt's framework as she described it, respectively, in her prefaces to Men in Dark Times and Between Past and Future. Both volumes evidence kind of an open-end conception. In her preface to Between Past and Future, Arendt states explicitly, that's a quote now, like all collections of essays, this book of exercises obviously could contain more or fewer chapters without for that reason changing its character. Thus, Menschen in finsteren Zeiten, Men in Dark Times, contains 15 essays, that means 4 more than Men in Dark Times. They were incorporated in the edition by following the principle that Arendt and her American publisher choose for the organization of the volume. That means a chronological order set by the year of birth of the person she was writing about. Among the new pieces are Martin Heidegger at 80 and Remembering W.H. Auden. The exercises in political thought became a 2-volume edition with 30 essays under the titles Zwischen Vergangenheit und Zukunft, which is a straight translation from Between Past and Future, and the second is called In der Gegenwart, meaning in the present. Aside from this, a volume containing all of Arendt's articles in Aufbau, the German-American newspaper, was edited by Marie-Louise Knut. It came out in 2000. The title uses a phrase from Arendt's writings: Vor Antisemitismus ist man nur noch auf dem Monde sicher. Safety from anti-Semitism actually is guaranteed only on the moon. A special case in question is a collection Die verborgene Tradition, which some of you may know. The hidden tradition would be the English translation, designed during Arendt's lifetime by Surkamp Verlag and published shortly after her death. The basis of this edition is a 6-essay collection that Karl Jaspers and Dolf Sternberger arranged for Arendt to be published in 1948. In the Pieper concept, these essays all belong to volume 3, that means to the writing on Jewish questions, and will be put in there since we are working on that edition now. As for unpublished posthumous materials, in addition to Vom Leben des Geistes and Das Urteilen, there are thus far 3 editions. One is called Was ist Politik? What is Politics? A volume containing all manuscripts Arendt wrote for an Einführung in die Politik, Introduction to Politics, contracted with Pieper Verlag in the 1950s but never completed. A few other pertinent manuscripts were added. The original manuscripts belong to Arendt's papers at the Library of Congress. From Arendt's Nachlass at the Deutsche Literaturarchiv Marbach, the handwritten Denktagebuch that you mentioned already could be transcribed, structured and annotated due to a generous grant from the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. This is a work I did together with Ingeborg Nordmann. It took us about 5 years. Other sponsors gave support so that the 2-volume edition could be published in 2002. Recently, Piper Verlag published a German translation of the lecture Some Questions of Moral Philosophy that Arendt gave in 1965 at the New School, and that Jerome Cohn published in his edition of Responsibility and Judgment. In German, it became, according to our policy, a separate volume and is called Über das Böse, on evil. Regarding posthumous works by Arendt, there is another section that needs special attention, that is the various editions of her correspondence, which you probably all know. I mean, it started with the letters to Karl and Gertrud Jaspers, then with the letter exchange with Mary McCarthy, then came Heinrich Blücher and Martin Heidegger. In addition, the following have not been these have all been translated into English, but then there are plenty more editions that have never been translated into English from the German. And that's the correspondence with Kurt Blumenfeld, with Hermann Bruch, with Uwe Jonsson, with Walter Benjamin, lately with Gerhard Scholem. Then, I mean, there are little correspondences, Adler Rüdel, Paul Tillich, Benedict, then Yahil is in English, Maschmann, and the Kaysen letters have also been published. Those are in English, but I don't think it's known, the publication is known in this country. So, I mean, there's a lot of work going on, because these private letters, I think, constitute the bulk of Arendt's posthumous work. And I'm sure there will be more, since she was such a lively letter writer, and since there is so much more material preserved among her papers and her Nachlass. So let me come to an end. If we consider what I have outlined briefly here, to be the state of affairs, and if we feel that we should improve our understanding of Arendt thought, then it follows that more work on Arendt must be done on a comparative bilingual level. Given the way Arendt handled her bilingualism, there seems to be a need for comparative English-German editions of those writings on which she worked in both languages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ursula.
I hope it wasn't too complicated.
No, I think it was great and quite clear. Let me ask a first question, if I may. You probably, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but you probably know Arendt's Nachlass as well, if not better, than any other person. What do you think reading her Nachlass adds to our understanding of Arendt that simply her published writings don't reveal? What do you take most from her Nachlass?
Well, I mean, that's what I indicated, the letters, of course, because it gives you most of her personality, which is not so much in the work. And on the other hand, you have all these lectures that are still unpublished, and in which you do find explanations and thoughts that have not gone into the published work, so they would be kind of a what's that in English? Addition to what has been published. And that, of course, is also the idea of when you go and start with a critical translation of your work, then you have to consider all this material that's in the Nachlass or in the papers in order to trace parallels or find contradictions or whatever. Yeah. So,
is there, I mean, as you know, one thing I found in the Denktagebuch was her discussion of reconciliation, which doesn't show up in much of her published writings.
That's right.
And yet, for me, opened up a whole new way of thinking about some of her published writings. Is there something that you have, is there like an idea or a particular letter that you have found incredibly revealing in your work that you go back to and point to and say, this one really speaks to me?
Nothing comes to my mind immediately. I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah.
Be a provocateur a little bit. Is the question on the editorial principle on the groupings as against a chronological organization. If we think of Arendt, other important intellectuals, as participants in discussions, in debates, there is a problem, or could be a problem, by decontextualizing in these categorized volumes rather than using, let's say, a simple chronological. I think of, for example, I know Arendt in the context of her participation in 1930s in sort of the interplay between Jaspers, Mannheim, and so on. And I think what she wrote then, or even quite possibly the original version of Rahava Hagen, might well be interestingly situated in that context if the documents were available. And similarly, of course, very importantly, although you have that in separate volumes, the whole change of our position on Jewishness, and the Jewish army and a whole bunch of other things that are in the nation pieces, or in the Aufbau pieces. So that I wonder what your thought is, or what your thinking was, and clearly you discussed these alternate options, about following her principle of organization rather than what might be a more critical one, where the writings are contextualized or set up so as to be more effectively contextualized in the Gespräche, in the discussions, in the disputes in which she played a part. Have I made my question clear?
Yeah, it's very clear. It's a question that is discussed all the time now, and there are also ideas of cutting up the Denktagebuch into, bringing out volumes, Hannah Arendt thinking between 1952 and 1953, and then putting in the Denktagebuch in there. That's a matter of principle, but when we did this, Hannah Arendt research wasn't that advanced yet. We just started from some kind of a 0 point.
I didn't mean as a criticism, I wanted to hear your explanation.
I still think one should consider what an author himself or herself published and take this as what she wanted to be in the world, to say it in her own terms. And I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't do a critical edition in addition to this here, but I mean, the works as such as she conceived them should not be destroyed in such a way that they get lost, so to speak.
Yeah, of course, it's something like this Denktagebuch is not a book that she designed, it's a collection of...
it probably would never have been published
Right.
if there hadn't been
Right.
somebody from the Deutsche Literaturarchiv coming over to her apartment, and she said, oh look, I have all this. Is this of any interest? And she said, oh yeah. And then he took it home, yeah. So,
Yeah, Pierre?
Do you find her to be a different writer or thinker of Deutsch versus English? And is there any way you could give, well, how would you characterize it then? What's the difference?
she's much more, I mean, although her English is really good, yeah, and admirable, when she writes in German, it comes out that there are more nuances to it, and I would even say that the work, I mean, that's perhaps going a little far, but there are certainly more nuances to it. Yeah.
What kind of nuances?
The nuances, there has been some research done on this now too, are to the effect that you can see that in certain, when using certain words or whatever, she had certain literary references in her mind, and they go into the German text without she telling her audience, but I mean, there have been studies on this her relationship with German authors, and they found out quite a lot of interesting things. Yeah. I mean, if you want to have an example, one that I like so much is that about the human artifice. Human artifice is one of the words that's used in the human condition. And I have really spent hours and hours to find out whether this is an English word. So I have gone to many dictionaries, and it isn't. And so, I mean, I couldn't find it in any reference book. And so, Barbara Hahn was it, who found out that there is a poem by Fontane in which there is a, in which you have the German Gebilde von Menschenhand, the German expression Gebilde von Menschenhand. And that's exactly what, I mean, she probably, either she has done the translation herself, or, you know, she had all these American friends with whom she also did translating work. And so they came up with this idea that Gebilde von Menschenhand would be human artifice. So this kind of thing. I mean, it's more specialized.
In the German edition, is that what it says?
Yes,
Gebilde von Menschenhand?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, what this is also fits into my earlier question, this concern, because when the work that we've done here on other emigrants and exiles, I mean, one of the key issues has been, and Arendt as well, have been the very difficult negotiation with the Bildung paradigm, not only the primary authors, but the whole Einstellung that is, you know, that was in dispute in Weimar Germany about what Bildung means, how it stands in relation to Wissenschaft, and so on. And that's not an English debate. I mean, there's a debate about arts and sciences or technology and humanities, which is a completely different debate. And these citations built in communicate to a German readership and involvement in this whole Bildung tradition, which is different than when it gets abstracted and transmuted into English, where her relationship to philosophical traditions is more highlighted. Or so I think that, I mean, it's that sort of critical possibility, but as you say quite correctly, it's open to people to do that work
Yeah.
once the
And
documents
you know,
are available.
of course,
So again, it's not an objection, it's just simply, it was that sort of thing I had in mind, because part of the whole issue is the non-translatability and the struggles that not only Arendt but others had, and what to do with this bloody whole discourse, which was so rich in citations, in direct allusions and references, so that they technicized their own vocabulary, as with artifice, which then means that we read it wrong, or we read it as they themselves didn't, because they read it themselves then in German. They never read it. They read their own English texts more likely in German. They did the instant translations. They didn't balk over artifice, human artifice, because she read it as Gebilde. I mean, Gebilde is one of the bloodiest, miserable words to try to translate into English. I've struggled with it myself. But so I think that's very rewarding, and and one of the things that comes out of the work.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is only that the German public today isn't educated enough anymore in order to understand. So, I mean, they would be better off with the English.
No, may I tell one more anecdote,
Well,
just a short one?
Yeah, I was just when you, to add to that, I mean, the whole idea of burden of our times, which is so important in much of Arendt's work, and the idea of a burden, turns out much of it comes from carrying the burden from her reading of Holderlin's poem, Mnemosyne, which we wouldn't have known if we hadn't had Ursula doing the work on the Denktagebuch, in which we learn of her reading of Mnemosyne. So these are important unearthings of the etymological and Bildungsvergangenheit that are absolutely important. So, David, can I go to Susan?
Oh, yes, please. No,
What happens to these insights in the new edition? Or in the other, sort of penumbra of other publications that may be coming out around this project?
What do you mean?
What happens to these kinds of discoveries? I mean, how are they reflected in the new publication, or are they being published somewhere else?
No, they're not published. I mean, they are included in some, at the moment we are preparing a handbook, and there in this handbook, of course, you will find some of these, but many of those just go into footnotes, and everybody who
There's an
belongs to the community knows footnote 33. There it is, yeah.
There's an incredible edition of Paul Celan's work that came out, you might be aware of it, a few years ago by Barbara Wiedemann, called the Kommentierte Gesamtausgabe, where she publishes all of the poems in chronological order with notes about what he was reading, where he was, when it was published, what is underlined in his edition of Husserl or whatever it was, and that's an incredibly interesting resource then, obviously, right? I mean, is there something like that which might happen in regard maybe to some of the works?
I mean, it would be good.
Especially since he was writing in a second language as well, right? Since he was writing mostly in French. No?
No.
No. Oh, not in that period?
He was writing in German, but he wrote to his wife in French, and he did a lot of things in French, but...
So this is a translation of the German writings onto French?
No, it's not a translation, actually. It's just a set of...
compilation.
A compilation of insights into what else was going on in his life and in the poems, and those kinds of literary references, which in themselves are not directly translatable, right? So...
Yeah.
No, I think we were just talking 2 days ago in our seminar about the real need for a new edition of The Human Condition, which is one of her main books that would, in a sense, be a critical edition that brings both the German and the English together. But I mean, the footnotes are there. I mean, the footnote apparatus in the Denktagebuch is fantastic. Barbara Hahn has written articles on her. I have an essay on reconciliation that's coming out. So people are starting to use it. But one of the real problems is that most of the Arendt scholarship in the United States is still done by people who don't speak German. And these works are in German. And so it's a problem. But it's slowly going to work its way in.
Yeah. The answer to this might be a simple no. So that's certainly an option. I wonder if as a translator of someone who already spent a great deal of time translating her own work, you ever ran into a situation where you disagreed with her translation of herself? or entertaining other
I mean,
possibilities.
her own translation have to be checked too. I mean, there are real mistakes, yeah. I mean, if you think of them as translations from the English to the German, I mean, then you find terrible mistakes.
Don't you have to then call them rewritings though?
Well, do any stand out as sort of philosophically interesting, or in a way that sort of opens up new interpretations of her work?
Well,
Or any
many points are really philosophically interesting, yeah, because, I mean, then she may have taken in some criticism that she already knew about, and then she defined what she was saying, yeah. So that, with the human condition, that can, that would make a bilingual edition of the human edition so worthless.
I just a couple of small points. One on the business of the current German practice. I have a funny story about that, and it ties in with a larger, more interesting point. A larger interesting point is that precisely the whole Heideggerian use of language is so importantly related to sort of reviving metaphors, reviving dead metaphors. So quite apart from literary citations or references, there's simply the problem of language, which gets distorted. I'll tell a little illustrative anecdote. I had translated Karl Mannheim, who would also use this type of discourse. And one of the important terms that he used was Zusammenhang. And the way he used Zusammenhang was quite literal, so that Zusammenhang was something that hangs together. And so it was kind of minimal category, sort of phenomenology, that first, before you have an object, you have a Zusammenhang, and so on. And so we tried to, we struggled, and we came up with trying to institutionalize in our own text with an annotation, contexture, as the word. It had enough of an echo of context from English, but at the same time it opens things up. And so when we then had our book, which contained some of this material, translated back into German, our German translator in the Surkamp translates this das Kontext. Whereas Zusammenhang is so obvious, literal word, but he translated as das Kontext because of the anglicization of German.
Yeah, that can happen too.
This is just kind of follows up Bill's question really, but you mentioned the Ray Sau's article. I think you're thinking of the piece he did on Arendt against Athens, probably. I found that tremendously helpful and revelatory about the differences between the English and the German editions, because I had, in reading and working with Arendt, I had always felt there was more of an influence by the Romans than was reflected in the English translation of the Human Condition and its reception as the weakest of her texts. And so that article and the ways that she revised Human Condition into, when she translated it into German, I think really did a lot for English language studies of Arendt. So I wondered, is there something like that in On Revolution or other of her important works that has jumped out at you in terms of her revision into German? Which would be equally substantively, important in revising how we receive her in the U.S.
There is some to it,
angle.
but I think the most important is the Human Condition.
Yeah.
Because that's also the one who she worked on for a longer time,
and later.
On Revolution, I think she just did more or less the work as a translator. She didn't put in too many things of her own anymore.
So some are closer to
with
translation.
the Human Condition, she really had enough time. I mean, I think one has to put it in these terms, to work on it again, and then this is what came out with Vita Activa.
Let me suggest, could someone pass some of those cookies around if anyone wants them? They're there for the taking.
Yeah, they look so nice.
Yes, and would you like one?
Smelled it too.
Yeah, our speaker would like one, so we'll make sure they get their way up here at some point. Greg, can you,
Yeah, I just had a somewhat technical question. I was curious when you mentioned this meeting at Piper Fairlad where you talked about
Yeah.
sort of the future of this publication. Was there an underlying philosophy there? And I ask this just in general because in German editions of, for instance, I was thinking of Georg Simmel, there's often this sort of erratic appearance of things, collections of smaller essays, thematized essays. And I'm just wondering how they were trying to think about that or how you were trying to think about that. Or was it really just the philosophy was trying to make sure everything stayed published?
With Arendt, they really wanted to have a concept because there were all these, especially the essays. I mean, the essay work is chaotic. When I put out in the bibliography at certain point, I have to say, well, I mean, one essay, for example, I think this is what is authority in English. It has had 5 English versions and 3 German, something like this. And so, I mean, the people just said, what are we going to do with this? And so they wanted to have some kind of a concept, and that's what we worked out at the time. And
It's heartening they did that, right? I just find for some things I'm just dumbfounded by sort of how to make sense of these collections and what the logic is. Which is the definitive translation?
I can say that this is the best that could have been done, but I mean, at least we did something.
If you had the endowment of the Marx Engels Institute back in the 30s, you could probably have done better. Then people would have gone to the death camps tour, and that's not a good price.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, just one.
Do any students have questions or comments or thoughts to share?
I think for students, this is a little bit far away from the ordinary work. I mean, this kind of editing and
But anything that serves to intimidate students is all to the good.
That's right.
So you
Put them on
realize
the
that no
spot.
matter what you think you understand, you don't really understand the secret.
so it has nothing to do with understanding. I mean,
Just teasing.
to a certain extent, you can say it's technical.
And it's interesting because in many ways we think of Arendt as a non-technical
That's not.
writer. I mean, she
But
was-
language-
I mean, she would probably have laughed about all these ideas we have now and fights about what.
Right.
She wouldn't have laughed about language, about paying attention to language. I mean, that's really a good part of what it was about. So, I mean, she uses language so much as her main methodology, is the exploration of language and politics. So this is hardly a merely technical.
No, but she
aspect.
opposes the interrogation and an inquiry into language to an interrogation of the theory.
Well, I mean, but it is also that she likes to have the last word, and I understand that.
Yes.
Some of the rest of us have that disease too.
And it's finished, it's finished.
She has these strong statements here.
Ich habe gesagt.
Okay, Sabrina.
I just have a question regarding something that I can't specifically cite, but I noticed that in The Human Condition, she uses the words subject and object in a radically different way than her teacher Heidegger. And I'm wondering, I mean, what do you think of that? Like, is that due to her philosophical disagreement with perhaps the way those words were used and what they were supposed to mean by her teacher, or is that something that perhaps she's trying to bring into language in an ordinary way to express?
Well, we had that problem with objective the other day, yeah. And I mean that certainly, and Ivan said that when she put it into quotation marks, it means something that leads you to the object and doesn't mean neutral or whatever. I mean, if you use the word objective in an ordinary language, you would say it's more or less, you would say somebody's making a judgment that is so to speak, ausgewogen.
Balance.
Yeah. And she, when she does this, That of course comes from Heidegger. There's no doubt about it, because I mean it was Heidegger who just really read what he was. I mean he read the words, and I mean he did this with the Greek and the English, and we also have from Arendt a quote where she, in her letters she once said, "Nobody she knows reads so carefully as he does." So that's kind of something that links the two together. Yeah.
Can I follow up on the Heidegger Arendt? As someone who's spent a lot of time with their letters and edited them, what was Heidegger and Arendt's relationship?
What was it?
No, I mean, what did she think? What did she think about Heidegger at the end? I mean, how do you characterize?
I can only say basically it was a relationship of love, no doubt about it. I mean, then you have to do the different stages, and then you have to. But I think, I mean, I would say basically there was deep, great love.
Dave?
I guess I was just going to add that in the context in which she's writing, there's a lot of importation as well of Hegelian uses of these terms, so that in the introduction of that, even in the American exile-influenced literature, and so the problem of separating her usage from the incorporation into English discourse, or into English intellectual discourse, of the Hegelian senses of those terms must have created a special problem that she wanted to signal, especially carefully, that that's not what she was doing. She's not doing it the way the Frankfurt people or any number of the other people who are also working in the same milieu would be using terms like the subjective and the objective distinction. I think that seems
I
likely.
should have said love that developed into friendship. Because at the end, I mean, it was kind of an old friendship between elderly people who were lovers in their way on. Complicated, but
So I wondered if you had any just reflections about, since we're sitting in the McCarthy house, it was just brought to mind for me that Mary McCarthy did play such an important role in helping her English up, her prose. And so I just wondered if you would reflect on that a little bit, because it's really, I mean, this is such a rare opportunity to see works that she translated back or even revised, as opposed to just translated into German, given that she had such a collaborator, somebody Englishing her up.
It's a good question, because it points to a very interesting thing. Mary McCarthy edited The Life of the Mind.
Exactly.
And nobody so far has checked what she did to Arendt's manuscript.
Yeah, and even just to track systematically,
There is a certain doubt that one or the other thing is just by Mary McCarthy and not by her. So, I mean, this is, if students want to do this, then that's a good topic.
Good project.
Because in the Library of Congress, there's a manuscript typed by Hannah, I think, and when Mary McCarthy has made her corrections. So,
Right.
I mean, that...
And it's apparent from their correspondence that they would argue about the translations a lot. So on the one hand, McCarthy knew her quite well, and she trusted her, but on the other hand, they are different thinkers.
I think she made great efforts to understand her, and in certain ways she really did.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean that when she wasn't there anymore,
and they couldn't
her
correspond.
own mind, so to speak, was overpowering.
Just on the anecdotes, I was at that conference in Toronto that you cited earlier, and Mary McCarthy and Arendt were chit-chatting through the whole conference. I mean,
Which conference was that?
the
Toronto.
Toronto conference that
Oh.
you cited.
Oh, yeah. You were at that.
Yes.
Oh.
And
We are still searching the tapes.
you're looking for them.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I was there.
Do you have a transcription?
There you go.
Actually, the high point of that
Smoking gun.
conference for me was someone was talking and for the 5th time talked about this country, and then one of the Canadians got up and said, "This country is Canada, and you're talking about the United States." But of course the person who did that was himself an American as well. But that was not Arendt. I mean, they were there and they were attentive, but I think they were not
I mean,
attentive
the
to
conference
everybody.
as such was unique because, I mean, they wanted to do a conference on her work and they just informed her that they would do it. And she said, okay, no, then I will come, yeah. And so, I mean, it was
Yes, no, it was a
but it turned out to be,
well,
tell us a little how you,
memorable occasion.
it went on for several days.
Several days, yeah. No, it was done, I think, under the auspices of the Conference for the Study of Political Thought. It was one of the early events, but I'm not 100% certain. Maybe Melville himself did that under the, but anyway, it was an interesting conference. I was only 60 miles away. I was in Peterborough, Ontario, so it was not a long pilgrimage for me.
I have time for one last question, if there is one. You want to ask?
Oh, was there anything of hers that she didn't want published posthumously?
Well, I mean, she was never asked whether her letters to Heidegger should be published, so, but she preserved them, so, I mean, and I don't know with her other correspondence, for example, Bücher, but also these, I mean, she gave them to the Library of Congress, so she must have been at least careless.
The dead have no votes.
Well, thank you, Ursula.